Let's jump right back in. I don't want to stop. So this is an A to Z mystery, Canary Caper, and we are ready for chapter 7, and we're going to find out what happens in this mystery soon. Only 3 more chapters. Chapter 7, a stakeout, Josh said. Ruth Rose nodded. Like in the cop movies, Dink asked. She nodded again. You think Mrs. Davis's house is going to get robbed tonight? Josh said. A third nod. And I plan to be there to see who does it, she grinned. Will that be enough proof for Officer Fallon? Suppose a burglar does come, Dink said. What do we do? Tie him up? All right, Josh said. I'll bring the rope. Ruth Rose shook her head. No rope. We just sit and watch. If someone comes, one of us will run to the police station. The other 2 will stay. If the guy leaves, we follow him. Dink thought that over. Follow him where? Wherever he goes, Dink. Maybe he'll lead us to where he stashed the stuff he robbed, Ruth Rose said, and maybe that's where he's got Tiger. Well, I guess it'll work, as long as we just watch the guy, Dink said. Ruth Rose nodded. We just watch. And eat cookies, Josh added. Dink and Josh sat in the dark tent waiting for Ruth Rose. It was almost 10 o'clock. Josh wore camouflage pants with a black t-shirt. Dink had on jeans and a dark gray sweatshirt. Where in the world is she? Josh asked. Dink peeked out the tent flap. My folks will kill me if we get caught running around Green Lawn at night. Mine would ground me for 10 years, Josh said. Why'd we let her talk us into this? Dink heard a noise. Did you hear that? He whispered. Josh peeked out. Ruth Rose, is that you? Boo! Ruth Rose giggled. I'm right here, Josh. Dink poked his head out. He couldn't see a thing. Come on, Ruth Rose. Stop fooling around. Where are you hiding? I'm not hiding. Suddenly, Dink could see her. Ruth Rose was sitting about 4 feet away, right in front of him. She was wearing black jeans and a black jacket. Her hair was covered by a ski cap. She'd even blacked out her face. Except for the whites of her eyes, Ruth Rose was practically invisible. What's that stuff on your face? Dink asked. Liquid shoe polish. She pulled out a bottle from her backpack. Here, put some on. Do we have to? Dink asked. Yes. What happens if the burglar sees your 2 white faces glowing in the moonlight? Dink poured some of the polish into his hands and smeared it all over his face. This stuff stinks, he muttered. Josh did the same. I feel like Rambo, he said. Dink saw Josh's white teeth gleaming. Let's head out, Ruth Rose said, slipping away from the tent. The boys followed her down Woody Street. Mrs. Davis's house was dark as they crept into her backyard. Dink tried not to think about what they were doing. Ruth Rose chose their hiding place, a shadowy patch between 2 thick bushes behind the house. The moon was almost full, but large clouds kept slipping in front of it. The kids wiggled around, getting comfortable on the lawn. Did you bring the cookies? Josh asked. I think Josh likes to eat. Yes, but let's save them for later, Ruth Rose said. We might be here for hours. Josh let out a big sigh. People who break their promises. She's right, Josh, Dink whispered. And I don't think we should talk anymore. If the burglar comes, he might hear us and take off. 5 seconds paused. 1 little cookie wouldn't kill you, Ruth Rose. Josh, this is a stakeout, not Ellie's diner. Cops eat at stakeouts. Josh, shh. Dink stretched out in the grass. He watched the back of the house for moving shadows. Nothing moved. He slapped at a mosquito. A white cat strolled through the yard. Dink yawned. Every few minutes, he checked his watch. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, it was nearly 11 o'clock. Josh was sound asleep, but Dink could see that Ruth Rose's eyes were wide open. Are you hungry? She whispered. He nodded and shook Josh's shoulder. Ruth Rose opened her pack. She brought out a bag of cookies, 3 bananas, and 3 cartons of apple juice. They ate in silence, listening and watching for a burglar to show up. Thanks, Ruth Rose, Josh whispered. Then he lay back down and shut his eyes again. Dink yawned and tried to get comfortable. He wished he'd brought his sleeping bag. It was soft, and suddenly he saw something move in the shadows next to the house. He shook Josh and put his mouth next to Ruth Rose's ear. Look, he whispered, pointing. But whatever he'd seen wasn't moving now. Dink trained his eyes on the back of the house. He saw only shadows in the trees and bushes. Then one of the shadows moved. Dink smelled Josh's cookie breath. "He's here," Josh whispered. Dink could feel Josh trembling with excitement. Dink's stomach did a quick plunge. Someone dressed in dark clothes and a baseball cap was creeping behind Mrs. Davis's house. He carried a gym bag and a long pole. The prowler was in the shadows, and Dink couldn't see his face. The burglar set his bag and the pole on the ground. Then he checked each first-floor window on the back of the house. Finding them all locked, he walked around the side and out of sight. I'm going to show you a picture before I go on. So there are the kids watching, and there's the man sneaking around with a pole. Wonder what the pole is for. "What should we do?" Josh said. "Is he leaving?" Dink shook his head. "He left his stuff." "Did anyone recognize his face?" Ruth Rose asked. Nobody had. Suddenly, the dark figure returned. He stood with his back to them, looking up at the house. Then the prowler turned around. He seemed to be looking directly at Dink. Dink was glad he blacked out his face. Suddenly, Josh grabbed Dink's arm. "It's the canary guy." Ruth Rose let out a gasp. Fred Little was walking right toward them.